Hello and welcome to UltraHuman. My name is Rachel and I am here to help you be your best human. And today I want to do that by talking about the what's and how's of winter nutrition. So first of all, I was supposed to have this video up yesterday. I actually did film a video, however I found out that my video editor on my phone is only capable of editing very short videos, and so I had to refilm it today. That's what's happening right now. So here we go, and I'm going to be condensing a lot of this information. I actually had a much longer video plan, but I'm just going to hit on the what's and how's of what to eat over the winter months and some about the why. So first, I just want to hit on the nutrition that we know we need. Obviously, throughout the year, your entire nutritional palette is very important. However, in the wintertime, we need specific things because our body lacks that light, like we've already talked about, and we are also under undue stress. Part of the reason for this is because typically, for those of us who do suffer seasonal depression, our bodies are kind of trying to go into a hibernation mode. And so by forcing ourselves to push through that, because the way our society is structured, where we can't really go into hibernation for a few months during the wintertime, we end up with higher levels of stress and stress hormone, and so that's why we need some of these nutrients in order to help cope with that. So the first one everybody knows about is vitamin D. Now vitamin D we typically get from the sun. It's actually a hormone that is produced in our skin, and so when we are less exposed due to both wearing more clothes and having less light during the day, then we typically become vitamin D deficient. Now, sometimes people confuse vitamin D deficiency and seasonal affective disorder. They are not the same thing, and you cannot completely treat seasonal affective disorder with a vitamin D supplement. However, you can do a vitamin D supplement and it's going to have a significant impact on your overall health and certainly on your mental health during this time of year. So my favorite way to get vitamin D is actually through cod liver oil. This is what they suggest in places like Norway. If you were to go to the pediatrician in Norway, they would ask, are you getting your kid a teaspoon of their cod liver oil every day? They probably don't measure in teaspoons, but and that kind of leads us into the next one, which is also found and is the more well-known reason that you would take cod liver oil, and that is omega-3 fatty acids. Now, omega-3 fatty acids, they're necessary for brain development. There's precursors to DHA and the myelin sheaths and things that we need in order to develop our brain matter, as well as to balance a healthy metabolism. And one of the things I wanted to hit on with omega-3 fatty acids is that during this time of year it's very tempting to eat a lot of comfort foods, and we really need to be careful to avoid things that are too high in omega-6 fatty acids. So this would include fried foods, lots of vegetable oil, or even poorly fed animal products such as like grain-fed beef, etc., etc. So some of the whole foods that you can find omegas-3 in would be sprouts, which I'm going to have to do a whole another video on sprouts because throughout this, sprouts kept coming up as they're so full of nutrition and they're very easy to make. So sprouts are high in omega-3 fatty acids, as well as flax seeds and chia seeds. So if you made yourself like a chia flax sprout smoothie, you'd be set. So if you're a vegetarian and you go that route, I do take a cod liver oil supplement, and I have had very good results with that, and it's very well, has a good reputation. So the next nutrient is vitamin B. So vitamin B, typically, I know I used to tell people who were vegetarian or vegan that they needed to get some kind of a supplement in order to raise their vitamin B levels. And that probably in the long run the best way to get vitamin B was to just incorporate something like egg yolk into your diet. Those things will help, although you don't really want synthetic versions of vitamin B. However, I know now, and I think science as a whole has kind of come to realize in the last like 10 and 15 years, that there is vitamin B sources all over in the plant kingdom and the fungi kingdom. And actually the best source of non-animal vitamin B is probably nutritional yeast. So if you're not familiar with nutritional yeast, it comes in these little flakes and it smells very buttery, and it tastes very buttery too. It's kind of salty and buttery flavored. And so actually the first time I encountered nutritional yeast, some vegan friends of ours sprinkled it over their popcorn and shared that with us, and it was really delicious. So that is one form. Again, sprouts, specific kinds of sprouts, not all sprouts, but peas and lentils, for example, will have vitamin B in pretty significant levels. And there's more that I can't think of right now. And like I said, I had to condense this video, so there will be some things that were in my original notes I just can't get to. So the next one, though, is potassium. Now, well, for some reason, there's this thing about bananas having a lot of potassium. I'm not even sure where that came from. They do have potassium. However, there are much better and more accessible versions of potassium, such as broccoli and a lot of the leafy greens. So that's another one I would just look up. High potassium foods. There's actually a lot. Nuts, for example, various kinds of nuts tend to be high in potassium. But what is really important about potassium is that this is kind of the voltage regulator of our bodies. And so we have, for example, what happens when we become salt deficient. We can go into seizures and have irregular heartbeats. Those are some of the things that potassium also helps with. So if you happen to be having nervous panic attacks where you are concerned listening to your heart beating very hard, that could just be self-induced stress, and I understand, I've been there as well. However, you could be potassium deficient, or at least raising that level of potassium in your diet might help with things like regulating heartbeat and the overall communication of your nervous system. It gives you a general calm feeling when you have good healthy levels of potassium in your system. So the next one to get into is calcium. Calcium, I only found out just a couple years ago how necessary calcium is for everything in your body. You can find calcium in just about any leafy green vegetable, broccolis, Brussels sprouts, kale, chard. All of these things have calcium in it. You do not need to drink milk in order to get calcium. As a matter of fact, because of the different components of milk, milk is a very complex solution, and so you can't really even process most of the calcium that is in the milk because it's actually going right into processing some of the other components of it. So milk, not the best source of calcium. Actually getting it from these leafy green vegetables, and if you are getting it in a supplement, make sure that you check your supplement so that it doesn't have calcium carbonate, because that's what actually the plants are taking from the ground. It's essentially limestone. The plants are taking that and turning it into another kind of compound called calcium citrate. So if you have a supplement, you want to make sure that you have calcium citrate in that supplement, because you're going to be absorbing much more of that calcium. I'm not even sure. I'm sure we get some calcium out of the carbonate. We can get that in like artesian water and things like that. But you're not getting very much of it, and it's not very bioavailable. It's not getting into your cells, and it has so much to do with cell regulation, all of the little interactions between cells, which also means I've heard it generally as if you have a short temper, one of the first things that you might want to look to supplement is calcium, and irritability is certainly part of what we all deal with in these shorter winter months. So the final nutrient I'd like to get into is iodine. The symptoms of an underactive thyroid look a lot like seasonal affective disorder, and that was initially what I assumed that I must have a couple winters ago when I started to look up all of these problems. I think I did have a somewhat underactive thyroid well, you have to get into that in an entirely different video because that's a pretty complex subject in and of itself. But iodine is absolutely essential to the functioning of our thyroid. This is what regulates our mood, our sleep, our appetite, our digestion. So all of these things, and an underactive thyroid is going to look like a person who is cold, tired, irritable, foggy-brained, all of these things that really are very intertwined with the conditions that someone who has a seasonal affective disorder has. So very, very important. Now, the final thing that I wanted to get into is just a general, an aspect of eating, a way of eating, or a way of not eating, that I think is very important to winter depression, specifically because a lot of the reason that we're putting on so much weight and that our cravings change over this winter period is that our bodies expect, for there to be a time of the year when we won't have food available, as all of the plants start to die back and we are losing a lot of the availability of things like leafy greens, and we're really cutting back to just like animals that we can kill and root vegetable here and there. Our wild selves are getting ready to starve for a little bit of time. And so I think that just because we are in a modern society where we can bring groceries to a grocery store from halfway around the world, and we never want for a leafy green vegetable, and we can eat kiwis in the middle of winter time, just because we can, I don't think it's better that we do. So I think that the best thing that we can be doing for ourselves is, rather than trying to control through willpower what we do and don't eat and tripping out about that sweet thing that we craved and we ate, or what we ate over Thanksgiving dinner, or that extra candy cane that we ate off the Christmas tree, instead of worrying so much about those things, since worry is going to put extra strain on your nervous system and your immune system anyway, is just to actually go through a fast. So fasting, if you're unfamiliar with it, this means going a period of time without food. There are all kinds of fasts. You can fast from solid foods, you can do just a straight water fast, and there are all kinds of religious ceremonies, including like Ramadan or Yom Kippur, that involve fasting. So this is a normal part of human culture that goes back forever. I'm sure that initially in human culture, we just went periods of time where we didn't have food. However, if you look at cultures all over the world, not eating for 24 hours is not considered a big deal. Kids do it, old people do it. So, and I'm not saying that you should necessarily subject your children to fasting, but I'm just saying that it's probably a lot less of a big deal than you think it is, being an American who has never gone more than 6 hours over the course of the night of sleep without eating food. So to get into the two ways that I would suggest giving fasting a try over these winter months, the first would be intermittent fasting. This is something that I do on an almost daily basis. I would say I do this probably like 5 out of 7 days a week, where between the hours of about 8 o'clock at night until between like noon and 1, I don't eat. And this, it doesn't sound that extreme, I don't think. Essentially, I'm just skipping breakfast and then waiting until lunch to eat. Studies have found that between 8 and 10 hours is when our body actually starts to burn fat in our system. And before that, it's burning glucose. So we have blood glucose, and then we have intermuscular glucose. And it takes that 8 to 10 hours to burn up all the blood glucose, and then it starts to burn off some of the intramuscular glucose that's all there ready for our fight or flight responses. And once our body has depleted those reserves of glucose, we actually start to go for the fat. And this is a great time for our body because not only are we breaking down fat cells, but actually this kind of blood fuel called a ketone is much better for our brains and our brain function. So perhaps you want to try this if you're in school or anything like that. You might want to wait if you have a test in the morning, get good night's sleep, drink lots of water, and then wait to eat until after you take your test, because actually, as much as I've heard it said, make sure you get a good morning breakfast before you go in there to take your test. In my experience, I feel much more groggy, and like all of my body's resources are going now to digesting food instead of focusing on the task that I have at hand. So personally, I find that I get much better results out of anything like heavily cognitive first thing in the morning, in that period of time between when I'm done kind of getting out of the groggy wake up period until about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning is when I'm feeling mentally the most productive. And then the second method of fasting would be to incorporate something like a weekly 24-hour fast. So maybe going from like dinner one night, and then going a whole day without eating, and then waiting until like a early mid-morning breakfast the next day. Now, there are people who do this all the time, every week. I will usually incorporate something like this maybe once a month. I am also, however, still weaning my daughter. I feel like I would do this a lot more often if I wasn't breastfeeding at all. And on that note, if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, just focus on the nutritional side of things. You don't need to incorporate any fasting into your lifestyle, probably, except maybe a very light version of an intermittent fast, you know, maybe like cut out nighttime snacking, for example, but maybe don't do the whole skipping breakfast part. Because the intermittent fasting is also, I believe, going to help your circadian rhythms, and that is a big factor in the seasonal affective disorder. So that's part of why it's good to pay attention, because sometimes when we lose all of our daylight at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it just kind of feels like it's dark all day, and so then we kind of lose track of like that we're actually eating dinner at 10 o'clock at night, because we've just had all the lights on in the house all evening. And so being a little more rigorous and attentive to the time of day and how that affects your biology is actually going to help you get a better night's sleep, and a lot of things that are just going to help biologically balance you out for this time when it might be a little bit more difficult to have that physical and mental stability. So that's all I have for you today. I hope I cut this down short enough that I can get this video up quickly, and thank you so much for staying with me. If you like this video, please give me a like and subscribe to my channel. I have new videos every Monday and Friday when I don't have technical difficulties. And in the meantime, get out there and be your best human. Thanks.